Here are some key discussion points. Look at steps that the interpreter and the court officials could have taken to make the situation better. What could be the outcome of the interpreter's behavior? There are always consequences to our choices. What might be some consequences for the interpreter? What might be the consequences for the lawyer? There's some terribly difficult situations that interpreters would face. How do they respond when they're caught between in a situation like this?
What we have to do is we have to remember at all times that all we are is a language bridge. We really have no place in the court except for the fact that we narrow that gap and we make communications possible. So outside the courtroom, we really don't have a job other than facilitating the communication.
I think the difficulty must be that while you're a professional, you're also a human being, and in a situation like that, people can be very manipulative, and this is where you have to really show a lot of strength, I think, to resist that kind of influence.
They try to be, and if you are talking to the person who doesn't speak English, the best thing that you can do is to direct them to their lawyer and offer your help. There is little else that you can do beyond that. And as far as the lawyer is concerned, he hired us to interpret, and that's all we're doing for him.
Marcus, I'm going to ask you to address the next question to you. What would be the proper way to handle a situation where your neutrality is really threatened, something like that, where you have to take a firm stand?
Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. You have to be very firm and professional. It's easier to do that when you talk to the lawyer who hired you, but you have to convey to the legal community what your role is, and there will always be people who, for one reason or another, don't quite understand that you are supposed to do what Yolanda just explained. It's more difficult when you deal with the client because, as you said, you're a human being and you do feel compassionate and you may believe what the person told the court, but you shouldn't become involved in any way in a personal manner. Often you go home in the evening and you don't feel very good about almost rejecting that person or rejecting the kind of help that they're expecting from you, but everything you do as an interpreter hinges on your credibility and your reputation. And if word spreads around that you do certain things that you shouldn't be doing, that credibility and the reputation is undermined, and one way or another you won't find any work anymore.
I think this could be particularly challenging for someone who's just beginning as an interpreter as well. I'm sure that after you've experienced a couple of situations along this line, you must get more adept.
Yes, it's also more difficult for people who work a lot and who are well known in the particular community, and they have a hard time because they're approached more often with unusual requests or requests that don't really correspond to their job.
How much information are clients given about what the interpreter's role is? Do people tend to be prepared? Can one of the other panel members, yes?
I would say that very few do know the role, and it's not just the interpretee, the accused, but Crown, for example, or the lawyer. Often the judge doesn't know the interpreter's role. I would say just about everybody. Certainly often the person you are there to interpret for has no idea. They look upon you as a friend, a counselor, an advisor. It's very, very hard.
So the interpreter can sometimes be thrown right into a situation where people don't necessarily have the time to really be brought up to speed on what the interpreter's actual role is.
That is the rule. The exception is when people know what your role is. And so you have to be very firm and know your own role and find a way to be comfortable in dealing with the attacks on your neutrality. Most people are not hostile, they're not bad people, they just don't know your role, and you have to understand this but maintain a firm stance.
How much time do you have before you go into court to state your case and explain what you're there for and what you're all about? And you're all just shaking your heads and rolling your eyes. Yolanda.
You get a little bit of time if the accused is not in custody, because the accused is probably looking for the courtroom himself, and you spot him and you actually ask the name to see if that is the person you're going to be interpreting for. At that point, you can introduce yourself, say, I'm your interpreter, and I am going to repeat everything you say to the judge. So everything you say, I am going to translate into English. And I'm sorry that we cannot have a personal conversation. And I leave it at that. Unfortunately, when the person is in custody, we meet with them, in the open court. They are usually in the prisoner's docket. They call them out. We go and we stand next to them, and there is no chance to introduce ourselves, nothing, because the judge is already talking to them. So at that point, all we can do is repeat what we hear. We have no chance to talk.
Has a situation ever arisen where an interpreter has been has known the accused? And what happens in that case? Do they have to state that, or you're our legal expert here?
Well, it frequently happens that an interpreter may know from their own ethnic community any individual who's the subject of a legal proceeding, whether an accused or an individual in a civil or refugee case. Yes, they are expected to advise the court that they do have a personal relationship, however casual or remote, with the individual. Again, they're expected according to the ethics of their own profession. Sometimes judges who are more sophisticated than others in terms of the role of an interpreter will take the time to hear that. Other times they just seem to be a little bit discombobulated, like, why is she talking right now? And so it is an educative process that interpreters need to go through as a group, as a body, through their organizational bodies, and for each individual. I wanted to say that although when you go into courtrooms, you don't have so much opportunity to set the parameters of your work, when you are asked to work with a new lawyer, and a lawyer calls you for the first time and says, I need someone to interpret in my office on Tuesday morning for a refugee claimant or subject of maybe an ICBC matter, whatever it might be, you have an opportunity then to inform this lawyer of how you do work, what your rates are. You want to clarify that, how you will be paid. If you're there to spend an entire day with someone, perhaps going through discoveries or whatever, tell them my job is really intense. I do an hour of straight translation or 2 hours, whatever interpretation, however long you will. Then I take a 10-minute break. Not may I have. Then I take a 10-minute break. And you can advise that person of exactly what are the various parameters, both ethical and practical, in terms of how you will work. There may be some lawyers, I haven't worked with a lot of interpreters, who are a bit taken aback. They're used to being in charge. They, I guess, see you pretty much as a functionary. But there are other lawyers, certainly I'm one of them, if an interpreter came into my office that sure of their ethical and practical guidelines, I'd be very impressed. I myself would say, now there's a professional, there's someone who's thought this through and who knows exactly how they intend to govern themselves in order to do the job well. And although not all lawyers may have enough experience using interpreters to react that way, certainly there are growing numbers, and that's part of your educative function. So feel free to state up front what it is you need in order to do your job well and ethically.